the 20th century Italian guitar making. Pietro Gallinotti. In my opinion, Pietro Gallinotti is the most important guitar builder in the 20th century in Italy. In fact, he was famous throughout Italy during the period of his activity, and his instruments were appreciated by the best national guitarists of his time. Even famous international performers owned an instrument of his. For example, Alirio Diaz, who often used his guitar both in concert and on record. In his long life, he died at 94, he produced about 700 Spanish model guitars, several jazz guitars, some mandolins, but also a conspicuous number of stringed instruments, especially in his early period. He was born in Solero, a village near Alessandria, in 1885. His father was a tailor, as his two older brothers were. He too was trained as a craftsman, learning the craft of cabinet maker. From an early age, he had a passion for the guitar and the mandolin that he played with friends, a passion that later influenced the choice of devoting himself to violin making, combining the art of working wood and the love for music. In 1915, he was recalled in the military due when Italy entered the First World War. Two of his 19th century guitars were probably built before leaving for the war, and at the moment they are believed to be his first instruments produced when he was still a cabinet maker. Regarding these guitars, one of them is to be considered his personal one, as it can be clearly seen in a 1925 photo that portrays him and his plectrum quintet. We think that he used it exclusively as his personal instrument because the guitar he is holding is easily recognizable by the presence of decorative fillets on the soundboard in the shape of a semicircle, not present in his other guitars of the same model. During the Great War, he was taken prisoner in Czechoslovakia, where he was assigned to the carpentry department. During his imprisonment, an officer gave him his violin to repair and subsequently commissioned him to build a new one. It was in this period of imprisonment that the passion of making violins was born in him. After the war, for a few years, he found work in Genoa in an artistic furniture factory. In this period, he met Cesare Candi, and it is probable that he also occasionally frequented his laboratory. Around 1920, he returned to Solero and decided to devote himself to violin making by opening his own workshop in his house. There, he built some 19th century model guitars, but with a design of his own shape, with very accentuated curves, more similar to the Viennese model guitar of Hermann Hauser, rather than to the forms of Guadagnini, which was the model used by luthiers in northern Italy. In the 20s, the production of guitars is in the background, both for quality and quantity, while the production of string instruments, mainly violins, is his most important activity. Not having had directly master luthiers, Gallinotti was essentially self-taught. He studied old lutherie treatises on his own and was also a friend of Giuseppe Lecchi, who lived in Felizzano, a village close to Solero. Lecchi was one of Cesare Candi's best students, and it is probable that Gallinotti had information on the Genovese construction technique from him. Especially the violins of the first period are in fact attributable to the school of Cesare Candi, both for the models and for the construction technique through the adoption of the external form. After a few years, he received important awards: a silver medal in Geneva in 1927, a bronze medal plus a silver medal for a cello and a violin in Rome in 1931. In 1930, he built the first Spanish model guitar, subsequently intensifying his production, while that of stringed instruments progressively decreased until the end of the 1940s, when it stopped. Among the relics of the workshop in my possession, there are templates and drawings with the names of Stradivari, Guarneri, Rocca, and others, but a detailed study on the production of Gallinotti's bowed instruments was not yet been carried out so far. The 1913 guitar, which I had the opportunity to see in my workshop, is built on a Spanish model and marks for Gallinotti the beginning of a new production that will definitely replace the 19th century Italian model. In the early 1930s, he was able to repair a Julian Gomez Ramirez guitar, owned by Edoardo Capirone from Turin, a pupil of Carlo Raineri. Throughout the 1930s, his guitars are built on this model, by which he establishes himself in Italy as an excellent Spanish model guitar builder, the best alternative to instruments built in Spain. Compared to Julian Gomez Ramirez's sample model, his guitars are very faithful in the design of the shape, in the design of the headstock, the bracing scheme of the top. Also, in the woods, he sticks to those used by Ramirez: spruce for the table, Indian rosewood for the case. For the neck, he uses mahogany wood instead of cedar. A structurally important element for the sound response of the guitar is the curvature of the harmonic table, which he obtained through the pretension of the table, very similar to its realization to the technique used by Torres and his followers. In spite of being essentially self-taught, Gallinotti has the great merit of successfully solving the various technical aspects, only relying on his creative genius. The decorations of the guitars of the 30s follow the style of the reference model, except for the rosettes, where he often uses other decorative motifs. As for the construction method, he does not follow the Spanish technique, which he ignores, but the Italian one, with the neck inserted into the guitar body when it is already assembled, while in the Spanish technique, the neck is incorporated into the guitar body during the assembly. The headstock neck joint is also made with a V-shaped joint, like the Italian romantic guitar, instead of the simple chamfer used by the Spaniards. This difference between the two construction methods is related only to a different practical procedure. In reality, it does not, in any way, affect the sound result, which is linked mainly to the organological characteristics of the model taken as a sample. In 1940, a guitar built by Francisco Simplicio, which had been badly damaged in an accident, was brought into Gallinotti's workshop. Since the Simplicio was equipped with a tornavoz, it was necessary to open the bottom of the guitar to carry out the repairs. In this way, he was able to study with precision the constructive system of the soundboard, which was different from the Julian Gomez Ramirez model. Besides the presence of the tornavoz, the lower part of the table was chained with 8 struts instead of the canonical 7 of the Torres model. The shape design was larger than the Gomez Ramirez model, a different headstock design. In addition, the body was made of Cuban mahogany wood. In the restoration operations, Gallinotti was able to study in more detail the interlocking system of the neck with the body, with the ribs inserted in the neck joint, different from the Italian system, which was a dovetailed joint. He immediately made copies of the Simplicio, completed with a bronze tornavoz, built by a firm in Alessandria. Also, the construction method changed, creating a synthesis between the Spanish and Italian methods. Instead of Cuban mahogany for the ribs and the bottom, he used mahogany from Honduras, widely used in Italy in those years in the field of carpentry, darker than the Cuban one, although less beautiful. Benvenuto Terzi very much appreciated the guitar with the tornavoz for their characteristic timbre, and he ordered one for himself and others for several of his students. This new Gallinotti Simplicio model followed the original in the structural elements, but without the abundant decorations present in the original instrument. A more essential aesthetic line, following an attitude that will be present also in the subsequent production, was aimed to create an instrument where the sound quality was the main focus. The instruments built in the 40s are based on the 2 models, Ramirez and Simplicio, but some instruments inspired by other Spanish models are also well known. The Simplicio model was also built without the tornavoz and with the use of Indian rosewood for the ribs and bottom instead of mahogany. High woods were used for the body, such as cherry, maple, and Japanese tigre. During the war period, it was difficult to find the woods. Especially, it was difficult to stock up on good spruce wood for the soundboard, having to resort in many cases to wood coming from damaged house beams, which Gallinotti used by joining several pieces of spruce to compose the table. However, these are also years in which he produces different types of new instruments, such as the guitar with 3 drones in the bass, fixed to a second headstock, and the mandolin. These apple-shaped mandolins were flat-bottomed, similar in pattern to the Portuguese mandolin. In 1945, he built a special guitar as a gift to his brother Giovanni, a tailor by profession and an activist in the justice and freedom movement in Turin during the liberation struggle. He himself, of communist faith, worked during the resistance to provide shelter to some partisans. In the first post-war period, he began to produce some jazz guitars, drawing inspiration from the Gibson and Hofner models. This period sees an intense production of classical and jazz guitars, mandolins and violins. At the beginning of the 50s, his fame consolidated, establishing himself as a great classical guitar builder, so he dedicated himself almost exclusively to meet the growing demand of guitarists from all over Italy. On the other hand, the production of violins significantly decreased. In 1952, he received an important recognition by winning the national competition of lutherie for classical guitar, held in Turin, with the gold medal that was given to him by Carlo Palladino, who was president of the jury. In that competition, they also awarded him the second prize, but with great humility, he did not accept it. It was given to Enrico Piretti, a talented luthier from Bologna. The guitar of 1952, with which he won the Turin competition, apparently the same as the other guitars usually built at the time, bore an element of extraordinary historical significance, which I was able to discover only in 2007 on the occasion of an exhibition in Solero dedicated to Gallinotti, whose I was the curator. In this exhibition, there was also the guitar of 1952, bearing on the label the inscription First Prize Competition Turin. For that exhibition, I compiled the cards of each instrument with measures and descriptions of the woods. And it was during this operation that I realized that the soundboard was made up of 4 pieces of cedar, a wood never used before in lutherie. Later, I had the opportunity to have that guitar in the laboratory to study it better. Studies confirmed that the cedar top guitar was original and not a later replacement. With this guitar, Gallinotti established a record for having anticipated the use of cedar wood for the soundboard for several years, used almost exclusively and successfully by José Ramírez III, from the early 60s onwards. On the occasion of the exhibition, the award-winning guitar was used in concert by Alirio Diaz, who had recently arrived in Italy. No others cedar Gallinotti built in the 50s are known, so we are led to think that this was only a first experiment. An in-depth account of the discovery of this guitar can be found in my article published in the magazine Sei Corde and in the online magazine of Guitar Saloon International. The 50s are characterized by a strong creative vein, both of quality and quantity. His son Carlo, born in 1929, a good guitarist, becomes his only assistant. Therefore, the annual production reaches 20 guitars. Carlo is in the charge of roughing the wood, bending the sides, processing the neck, assembling the body, while the most delicate and important works, such as the realization of the soundboard, the choice of the shape, the thicknesses, and the French polish, were his father's exclusive competence. To the two models, Gomez Ramirez and Simplicio, he also added a new shape inspired by Santos Hernandez, which is considered the most elegant, summarily called the Santos model. In many cases, these three models merged into one, so you can find guitars with a Simplicio shape, but Ramirez bracing, or the opposite. The quality of the woods is also superior, especially for the soundboard. The wood of the bottom ribs is also always Indian rosewood, but the maple, cherry, mahogany are also used. It is believed that the 50s represent for Gallinotti the period of best production, mainly of guitars. The last stringed instruments are from the early 50s, including a viola d'amore, which bears two dates in the label, 1934-1954, i.e. since the instrument began and when he finished it. It is a unique piece of his production, according to his curious belief that a good luthier must, in the course of his life, have made at least one viola d'amore. This viola has never been played, as it still has to be strung, and was donated by Carlo Gallinotti to the municipality of Solero on the occasion of the naming of the municipal library after Pietro Gallinotti. After the experimental period of the 50s, including his last guitars equipped with a tornabos, to a lesser extent than in previous years, there is a 1954 guitar with a 670mm diapason, in addition used on a small shape guitar with a surprising sound. A guitar with such a long diapason was a novelty for the period, considering that only many years later the José Ramirez house introduced the 665mm diapason on his famous cedar guitars. The 1960s saw a stabilization of production. The Gomez Ramirez model was abandoned because it became customary to use larger shapes, Santos Hernandez, Simplicio, Hauser, and even personal shapes. In some instruments, the diapason is of 665mm. The French polish is always a shellac, but free of dyes. The quality of the wood is excellent. The processing and the aesthetics are affected by a certain repetitiveness, I believe due to a now codified practice. Furthermore, Gallinotti's advanced age, almost 80 years old, perhaps did not allow creative impulses to experiment with new construction projects, entrusting more and more to his son Carlo the production, at least towards the end of the 60s. From 1958 to 1961, Carlo was a full-time musician in Franco Carletti's quartet, where, with the jazz guitar built by his father, he played in Spain and Denmark. Returning from the tour, he resumed playing luthier with his father. Among other things, he recorded with Gianni Coscia, his great friend and famous accordionist from Alessandria. In the early 70s, Pietro Gallinotti and his son Carlo introduced a model with a wide and deep body, often with a cedar top and a 665mm long diapason, clearly inspired by the guitars of José Ramírez III, which in those years had a worldwide success. The quality level of the guitars built in this last period of activity is lower than those built in the previous years. There are simplifying elements, such as the use of industrial rosettes, and the bottom of the guitar, in many cases of rosewood plywood. Looking at the guitars of this period, a certain tiredness is noted due to the advanced age, and the hand of his son Carlo in the last instruments is also evident. In May 1979, Pietro suffered a stroke while he was working. After a few days, he died on May the 12th, 1979, at the age of 94.